We are at the sixth part of the introduction to Kabbalah and Chassidus of Rabbi Gershon Chanech of Radzin, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Mentioning the name of the Tzaddik is a blessing. God's conduct of the world was at first supernal. Supernal means beyond man's understanding. The Hebrew word is Elyon, as opposed to Tachton. There's the upper world and the lower world. For the upper world and for the part beyond man's understanding, we call supernal. Initially, God conducted the world on the level that we call supernal. Avraham Avinu removed the veil concealing God's light from man's understanding. From the days of Avraham began the 2,000 years of Torah. This is, as we find in the Gemara, the Talmud, and Sanhedrin, there were 2,000 years of chaos and 2,000 years of Torah. The Ramban, Nachmanides, comments on the verse in Breshit, and God blessed the seventh day, by saying that the 2,000 years of Torah began with Avraham. So too do we find in the Midrash, and the earth was chaos and formless, and darkness on the face of the void. These are the first generations. And God said, let there be light. This is Avraham. Avraham began to illuminate the world with the understanding that God exists not only in the heaven, but in the earth. Noach had a son named Shem, one of his sons. Shem was identified as Malki Tzedek, the king of Shalem, the king of Salem. See the 14th chapter of Genesis, verse 18. Malki Tzedek, this was the son of Noah. He addresses God as El Elyon, the supernal God. The verse says he was a priest of El Elyon. And he said, blessed is to the El Elyon, and blessed is El Elyon, the supernal God, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. Elyon, supernal, represents that which is above man's comprehension. Before the giving of the Torah, the act of studying the Torah and the service of God was done through tremendous self-nullification, trial, and suffering. By means of this, they arrived at the understanding of the knowledge of the existence of God. And I'm adding the connecting to God. It was done through self-nullification and suffering. And then, this was all before the giving of the Torah. And then the knowledge of the one who rules the world in the aspect of the supernal God was accessible to them. Avraham, however, understood that God is not only in heaven, but also fills the whole world with His glory. He removed the orla, the force of concealment, which divided God's light from man's understanding. The orla is the word for the foreskin. It's something that covers. So Avraham with circumcision, it was a choreography of something sublime, something godly. The ability to conceal, the ability to remove the concealment of God's presence from the world. Thus we find after the giving of the commandment of circumcision, Brit Milah, as it says in the book of Genesis, chapter 21, verse 33, and he called in the name of Hashem, the God of the world. Right after the circumcision, it doesn't say he called in El Elyon, the supernal God, God in heaven. No, after the Brit Milah, directly after the Brit Milah, in the 21st chapter of Breshit, Genesis, it says that he called in the God of the world. This means that we may be conscious of God's existence in all aspects of creation. And we find in the Midrash Rabbah, the hermeneutic legends explaining the Torah, and from my flesh I shall see God. When Job said this verse, he meant one thing, but the Midrash explains something else. He says, from my flesh shall see God. If it were not but for the act of circumcision, how could it have been possible for God to have been revealed unto me? How could it be possible for God to be revealed unto me? But that I did this action, this choreography, this path in the service of God. Right after the circumcision, it says, God appeared unto him. He saw at that time that God's light shines from all the details of creation. When Avraham said, I raise my hands to the supernal God, it was before the Brit Milah. This is explained in the Beit Yaakov, the book of the father of the author, whose book I am reading to you now. Similarly, we find that the patriarchs taught the Torah to their sons. The Midrash tells us that while Israel was in Egypt, they possessed scrolls which they would delight in each and every Shabbat.